Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you ever so much for joining us today to talk about the very important subject of data protection. We have Rachel Masterton, the Deputy Data Protection Commissioner, here on the call to run the session. A little bit of housekeeping. If you've got any questions that you want to pose, please do put them in the chat and we will come to them at the end. If we don't get to cover everything today, we will try and cover it off in the post-event email. We will be sending you the slides, and also just to let you know that we are recording today's session. So if you do want to go back over anything, or if you do need to share it with any of your colleagues, you have that resource available to you. So I'm going to stop blathering on now, and I'll hand over to you, Rachel.
Lovely. Thank you, Alice. Hi, I'm Rachel Masterton. Really pleased to be here today, and thank you to Chamber for organising the webinar and doing all the tech side of things. It's meant I just had to log in and share my screen, and that's all just worked. So
We'll
that's
see
all
how
good.
we get on.
Yes, we will.
Bear with us.
Yes, sharing screens possibly come up later when we talk about data breaches and the joy of, is it the right screen I've shared? And am I accidentally going to show you the internal workings of my email, which you'll all probably have a little bit of a faint as you see the unread emails and what I've got to get through. But there we go. Thank you all for joining us today. It's great to have you here. I'm just going to start with what it is that we're going to, or the reason, what you're going to get out of this session. So the aim of today is to get you positively engaged with data protection. So to get over any concerns that you might have about the topic, about how to deal with data protection, about what it means, how it makes you feel, getting you feeling that you're equipped to handle personal data in your organizations, so that you're doing what you're required to do by law in relation to data, but also meeting the needs and expectations of your customers and clients and staff. Of course, remembering that personal data doesn't just relate to your clients and service users, customers. It also relates to the individuals that you have working for you. They've got personal data and the rights apply to them as well. And then trying to put on a bit of a smiley face so that you're comfortable coming to talk to us about any problems that you might have, any questions that you might have. And we'll answer what we can at the end of the session. But afterwards, if you want to come and ask some more questions, pop in. We'll give you all the means of getting hold of us and how we can help you. We really want to speak to people, businesses and organisations before something goes wrong. We'll give you some advice and guidance if something goes wrong, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as the session progresses. But we realise the importance of helping you get it right first time, and not just because something's gone wrong and you've had a breach or somebody's not happy with the way that you're handling their personal data. And we want you to come and speak to us about that. So we'll touch on that as well. So the things we're going to cover today is a little bit about why data protection matters. We're then going to look at the 5 steps that we think help you the most on your journey to compliance. So things you need to think about. And then, as I said, we'll have time for questions and answers at the end. These slides are usually done in person when we have some housekeeping, but I will just say if the fire alarm goes off here, I know from experience that you on the other end can't hear it, but if I dive out suddenly I'll be found lurking outside our office because the fire alarm's gone off, but hopefully we won't get to that. So first thing then is just a little poll, and I was hoping that I'd cracked polls in Teams, but I haven't just yet. So we're going to go old school for this one. So in the chat, if you could just indicate how well you feel you understand your responsibilities under data protection law. So whether it's a smiley face, I'm hoping no sad faces, or whether it's terminology used, whatever it is, if you can pop into chat just how you think you're feeling. I'm not going to take down who you are and which organisation you come from, so I'm not coming back later to sort of point fingers at somebody if they're not happy with how they feel about data protection. But yeah, just to get a sort of an idea of what's going on, and also to make sure that you're all still there and you haven't all dived out the room because of a fire drill your end. So there we go, some happy faces, a little puzzled or thinking face. I'm going to go with that's an I'm thinking about it deeply face rather than I don't, I'm puzzled by it all. But yes, some good emotions in there. We can have a look at that as we get to the end and see maybe whether your faces have changed any after we've spent the hour together. So thank you all very much for that. So starting then with personal data. And personal data is what data protection legislation is all about. And personal data is essentially um, any sort of information that can identify an individual and whether it's on its own or whether it's when you combine it with other information. And on the screen, we've got examples of the sort of personal data that there is that you may yourself hold. About either, as I say, your clients or your staff. But essentially, it's all about people. So instead of thinking just about the data, and it's unhelpful, I think, sometimes that the title of the legislation seems to focus on data, which is a very technical type thing. You've got data a lot in computing, things like that. Actually, what data protection is all about is people. So we like to think that instead of just thinking about data protection, we realize that that's actually people protection. And so that's the importance of data protection is it's about protecting people. It's about protecting the information that you might use about them. And that can have a number of benefits for you and for the individuals. And we'll look at those in a slide on the next slide. What's important to understand is contrary to perhaps a feeling out there, data protection is not here to make life more difficult, to block things that you want to do, to stop you doing what a reasonable organization might want to do with the information that they hold. It's to just help you think about doing it in a way that ensures that your customers, your clients, your staff are happy about what you're doing and that they don't feel that they're being the information isn't being handled appropriately. So these are the benefits of thinking about this people protection, this human at the heart, around trust and confidence of people in your organization. And we are noticing that people are looking more for how an organization is going to handle their personal data now than maybe they have in the past. So that may be a business separator. It might be an area of competitive advantage. And that links with service user retention. So keeping people, keeping your clients, and thinking about your reputation. But also very important is harm prevention. So stopping information being used in a way that it might be harmful to the person that you're processing personal data about. And when you're thinking about harms, it's often useful to think about how you might feel if it was your personal data that was being used in the way that you as an organization might want to use it. So if you feel a bit ick about something that you're suggesting as possibly a new business line and a new area you want to get into, the sorts of information you might want to process about individuals, if that makes you feel a bit uncomfortable, if it was your information or information about someone you care about, then perhaps that's an indicator that you might want to look somewhere else when it comes to how to build your business. Also, data protection, one of the benefits can be effectiveness. And I know that that may sound a bit odd when you think that there are things you need to do in order to comply. But if you've got a system that's set up well to respond to requests from individuals for the data that you hold about them, then you've got a system that means you can find that data for your own use when you need to in order to meet the requirements of, say, a contract you've got with the individual or the service you're providing. We have had in the past organizations say that it's difficult to respond to a data subject access request because they can't find all the information. And that does make you wonder whether they're using it in the best way themselves, whether you're leveraging that asset. So to get a little bit mercenary about it for organizations, if you're embracing data protection and looking at the ways of processing personal data appropriately, that can actually make your business areas more effective. I mean that you can leverage the data you've got in a way that you maybe couldn't before. So those are the sorts of things we think about when we put the human at the heart and the benefits of embracing data protection. We're going to go through some definitions. We talked about personal data being essentially anything that relates to an identified or identifiable individual. And we will talk a little bit, or I will talk a little bit in the session about special category data. And that is a subset of information derived from the European Convention on Human Rights. And it's the sorts of things that individuals have been persecuted on the basis of previously in some jurisdictions, and perhaps even now in the 21st century, that there might be some prejudice, some persecution on the basis of these this type of data on the screen. So race, ethnic origin, religious or philosophical belief, things like that, health data. And when you're processing special category data, you'll be possibly looking at a greater risk than you might do with, bog standard, just name and address information. Once you start processing special category data, that's something about which people are a bit more sensitive, rightly so. You don't necessarily want everyone to see your health information. So if you are processing that, then you want to make sure you're doing it appropriately. And again, put yourself in the shoes of the individual when you're doing that. Other definitions of things that I will have said or will say as we go through. The first one, processing, which I think I've probably said about 8 times already. That is in essence anything you do with personal data. So that's the collecting of it and recording right at the start of a customer journey, through to the how you use it, who you might share it with, what you do with it when you've got it, all the way to how you get rid of it at the end of the journey. So when you're finished with the personal data, when you no longer need it, how do you destroy it? How do you delete it? How do you make sure that it's not then left around for somebody to misuse? We had a very interesting breach reported to us a few years ago now, where it would appear somebody had forgotten the bit about processing and having to process in accordance with the legislation applying to the destruction of data, because instead of shredding the information in the shredder, they just opened the front of the shredder and threw some documents on top of all the shredded paper, which is a little bit, not quite what was intended. And then that was taken away. And obviously there's information in there that should have been shredded. So some examples of the way that you need to think about processing personal data, that it's the whole life cycle of the information you've got. Then a term that comes up a lot is controller, and that is essentially the entity that is deciding what to do with personal data and how they're going to do it. So this is your organization. Most usually it is an organization rather than one person in particular who is the controller. So you all work for a controller, which is the organization, and the organization will decide what information it needs, what personal data it needs about people, and how they're going to process that. So whether it's going to be on computer systems, and if so, how, whether it's going to be hard copy, whether it's CCTV, whatever it might be, that's all personal data, and that's all decided by the controller. So they say, this is what we're going to do with the information. And a lot of the responsibilities under the data protection law apply to the controller. So it's all about the controller making sure that it complies with the data protection legislation. We also have the term processor, and it may well be that some of you are work for an organization that acts as a processor for some other organizations. So essentially a processor is an entity that does something on behalf of a controller. With some personal data. Now, it might be personal data the controller's collected, or it might be personal data that a processor's collected. But in any event, they're only doing with it. A processor only does what they are told. So an example might be a payroll company. So if you outsource your payroll, you as the controller are responsible for the payroll information, and you are the person saying this is what I need in order to do the job. And you are then engaging the services of a processor and saying, I don't actually want to run this myself. Can you do it for me? Here's all the information you need. Now you go off and make sure that our staff are paid, that Social Security is paid, the income tax is paid, pension, anything else that you need to run through that. And for the purposes of that arrangement, the controller remains you as the employer of the people, and the processor is doing the job that you've asked them to do. The processor has to comply with elements of the data protection law, but for a lot of things, the ultimate responsibility sits with the controller. So just to think about that, it might be a way you process your data. You might have some that you some stuff you do internally, and then some stuff that's done externally. Now, the data protection law is based around 7 principles, and you may well have seen these principles before, because let's be honest, we're something like 8 years into this journey with the new data protection legislation. So I probably should stop calling it new. And this is the 7 data protection principles. And the basis for these principles is accountability. We'll talk a little bit about accountability in a couple of slides' time. But stemming from accountability and building on accountability, you've got the idea of processing lawfully, fairly, and transparently. And we'll touch a little bit on that as we go through this presentation. You've got this idea of purpose limitation. So if you're using personal data for one thing, you shouldn't use it for something wholly unconnected with that, unless you consult with the individuals concerned and have a good reason to do so. So there's various things you need to think about there. Minimization is one of the principles. So that's about only having the personal data you need. So not holding things just in case. Just asking for what you need in order to do the job. And you can ask for what you need in order to do the job. And if someone won't give you what you need to do the job that they're wanting you to do, then you can't do that job. And that is perfectly acceptable to say that you can't, if you're not going to give me your address, I can't deliver this item to you. So that's perfectly reasonable. But there may be occasions where you may be tempted to take on a little bit more personal data than you normally would. And you need to think about whether you want that. And that's important not only because it's a principle, but because the more personal data you hold, if something goes wrong, if there's a breach, if somebody compromises your systems, then you've got more personal data in there to be compromised. And if you shouldn't have had it in the first place, that starts to paint a much more dubious picture when it comes to looking at it from us as the regulator. Then you've got the principle of accuracy, so making sure the information you have is accurate and up to date, that you update things when you need to, and that you're not letting your information get rapidly out of date. That means that maybe there'll be a breach because you send it to the wrong place. Storage limitation is all about not holding for longer than is necessary. So you need to think about what that looks like, and we'll touch on that under one of the 5 steps in a moment. And then the last one, integrity and confidentiality, is essentially security. So making sure that your systems are secure, that you've got technical measures in place to stop people being able to get to information they shouldn't, that you've got organizational measures in place to make sure information is only used in the right way. So those are the principles, and you may, as I say, may well have seen them over the last 8 years, and they crop up when you're looking at data protection. So how to comply, 14 steps. We're not going to do all 14, don't worry. But these steps are taken from our Feel Good Guide. So if you haven't seen a copy of our Feel Good Guide, pop onto our website and there's a copy there. Search for Feel Good Guide and it will take you through a number of the things you need to do around data protection, give some more background to the data protection law. But it will outline these 14 steps. Now, as I say, we're not going to go through all 14 today because we said we were going to do 5. So we've picked the 5 we think is most important for you to nail at the start of your data protection journey. Although it is important to remember that data protection journey doesn't mean that once you've done them once, you move past and never look back at it. It is a dynamic situation, so you will need to review things as you go. But the 5 steps we're going to look at are step 4. So 4, know your data, then telling people what you're doing with their information, looking at security and breaches, looking at registration, and then accountability. And we're going to start with accountability because accountability is the big thing in the legislation. And essentially, it's all about being able to demonstrate that you are doing what you need to do. So it's not good enough just to hope that and pray that no one's ever going to ask you to explain what you're up to, why you're doing what you're doing. You need to be able to demonstrate that you are complying with the law. So it means keeping appropriate records. It means training your staff. It means having contracts in place with parties. But essentially, it is taking responsibility and as the name suggests, accountability for what happens in your organization. And sometimes, thankfully, there's not a huge number of examples spring to mind immediately in the data protection world, but you often see select committees in the UK having meetings with various public-facing entities where there have been issues around accountability. And if you think about the post office example with the Horizon system, where it's all a lot of that's not sitting with me, it's not my fault, I didn't know that, and not taking accountability for what you're doing. So it's standing up and making sure your organisation says, this is what we do, this is why we do it, and we stand by what we do. So thinking about accountability is important. It's also very important to know your data. So this is why this is step 2. because you and in your organizations are the best people to understand what it is you're doing with the personal data you hold. Um, so it is knowing all those different systems. It is being able to call them up to understand how they're used, how the system, different systems interact. It's knowing the data you have, why you've got it. So why do you have that information? If you've got spreadsheets from 15 years ago that you never use, then should you really be keeping that information anymore? Then it's thinking about who has access to the personal data that you are using. So looking at how you make sure that security is put in place. And the only way you can make sure that you put appropriate security in place is to actually know what it is you've got in the first place. There's a wonderful example in the UK of a police force that moved from one police station to a new building, and they packed everything up and moved. And then the old building was leased out to new tenants, and they went down into the basement and found at least one filing cabinet, possibly more. Memory fails me a little bit on that front, but the police force had left behind a filing cabinet. The new tenants decided it would be fun to break it open and see what was in it. And inside there were some interviews, recorded interviews and videos of some quite serious offences and around the investigation of quite serious offences. And that's an indicator, an example of somebody not knowing what information they held, in that they just moved out and left it behind. So understanding what you've got, where it is, why you're using that personal data. Thinking about whether it is special category data and do you need to put extra safeguards around that. Thinking about how you use it, the reasoning for using it, and what happens when is the data so old or at a point that you don't need it anymore. How is it then destroyed? So you, as I say, are really best placed to know this. We've done some work with various organisations about what we're going to come on to next, about data processing notices, which is about telling individuals what you do with their data. And we've had some that have spent quite a bit of money with law firms getting lawyers to write them up these documents. But actually, when you look at the document, at the data processing notice, it doesn't necessarily cover everything that the organisation is doing, because whoever wrote it didn't understand, as well as you might, how the organisation works. So a lot of data protection is just knowing the information that you're holding and then working from there. And as I say, you are best placed to know that because it is your data. Let me move on to telling people what you're doing with their data. So as I say, data processing notices, what is it that is going on with the personal data? How are you using it? And how do you tell people what happens with their data? Now, some of you may remember in the run up to the glorious 25th of May, 2018, when our new law and the GDPR across Europe came into force, our inboxes were jammed full with lots of organizations doing this step. So making sure that their clients and customers knew how their personal data was being processed. Because something that we get a lot here is people phoning up, upset because they didn't know something was going to happen with their information. So they've perhaps given it to a bank and the bank have used it in a way that's perfectly reasonable, but because there wasn't the explanation given about what was going to happen with information, the people, individuals, you at home with your whose personal data is being processed by these organizations doesn't know what's going to happen. So when it is used in a way somebody wasn't expecting, that will cause a bit of a dent in the confidence and trust that an individual might have in your organization if they didn't realize that was what was going to happen. So you'll have seen data processing notices or privacy statements on websites at the ends of forms. You might be directed to them. You can ask, anyone can ask your organization for your data processing notice or privacy notice, however you've badged it. And that needs to cover off a number of different things about what you are doing with data, which lawful processing condition you're relying on, how long you're going to keep that and when are you going to get rid of it. It also requires you to tell individuals that they have a number of rights over their personal data. And you can get some more information about that off our website. You also need to say that they've got the right to make a complaint to our organisation. So if they're not happy with something you've done, they can make a complaint, and you need to tell people that in your data processing notices. So this is a way of stopping the surprises. So if you get this right, people know how you're going to use their information. That will stop them being surprised when, something random that they could potentially see as random happens. You can say, no, we'd always intended to do this. This was what we were looking for. So have a look at your processing notices, make sure you've got those in place. We've got information on our website, and we will be launching a template in the next few weeks that will help you draft a data processing notice. And as I said, when we were talking about know your data, you actually are in a really good place to do this because you know what you do with your information. So by all means, seek out the advice of lawyers and experts in the field, but remember, you know what you're doing. So this is something you can do. You don't need to be spending lots of money on it necessarily. So second poll, because we're just about to launch into data breaches. I'm interested in knowing whether any of you here have ever had cause to report a breach to our organisation. Again, I'm not taking notes, so I'm not going to sit down and see, and I don't necessarily want to know how many you might have reported. But under legislation, there's a requirement in certain circumstances to report a breach. So hands up if anybody's had to do that. And it's looking like not. So that's super. One, excellent, thank you. And another one in the chat. It seems slightly counterproductive, but I actually do like to know that people are reporting things because otherwise we don't know what's going on, and there might be lots of things happening out there, lots of breaches happening out there, and we don't know anything about them. And we're not necessarily going to come in all guns blazing when you report a breach to us, but we know that you're taking it seriously if you have picked it up and been doing something with it. So we'll talk a little bit more about breaches now. But thank you for putting your hands up. So there you go. So step 4 is thinking about data security, and as I say, about handling breaches. So this is putting in place various different measures so that your data remains important to you, that you can access it, but doesn't leave your organization in a way you might not have been expecting. And this is important not only because it's somebody's information and they might be harmed if that's used in a way they weren't expecting. If it gets out of your organization and into the wrong hands, things might happen. But it's also important from your point of view in that the data you process is your asset. That's how you make your money. And you don't want anybody to get hold of that, because then you lose your competitive advantage that comes with that information. So data security is important from 2 different aspects. As I say, this is about putting security measures in place. So it's having passwords, multi-factor authentication to stop people that shouldn't gaining access to your system. It's physical security, but like locks and locked cupboards and security systems on doors, potentially alarms, whatever you feel is necessary for the information you process. We do not have on our website a document that says these are the things you need to do to protect your personal data, because again, things will change depending on the information you hold, how much you have, the sensitivity of it. So you are best placed again to understand the sorts of things that you need to do to protect your data. But we would say things like multi-factor authentication is sort of a place to start, is making it difficult for somebody to hack in. Now, around data security, you've also got training your staff, and that's an important one, is to make sure that your staff understand what to do with personal data, that they can recognize a phishing attack, perhaps, if somebody's asking something over an email. We have had examples from a variety of organizations where an email has been sent, a link has been clicked, and that has then allowed threat actors to come in through a backdoor, through something that they've exploited, and take a look at the personal data that's on the systems, take copies of that. Sometimes it's ransomware, so they lock it down and stop you getting access to it. Sometimes they'll use it to launch further attacks. So it's not unusual to trace a chain back. If you get a phishing email purporting to be from company A, and you speak to company A, you might find out that they had a phishing email, and that's how come you've got it now, is that their systems were compromised it picked up your information and is now emailing you to try and get you to allow them into your organization, and to keep going like that. And so it can be a cascade of access by people trying to get into your information. Some of the most common breaches we get are the good old email breaches, where you've either forgotten to put or you've not put the right name in the to field. And I think we've all had those heart-stopping moments where you send an email thinking it's going to one person, and then just going and double checking in the sent items to make sure it was the right Emma that you picked, and you've not sent it to, your accountant when you meant to send it to your boss or something like that. So just making those sorts of errors. We get quite a lot of those reported to us. Attachments are another thing. So where you might be attaching a document to an email, be double check that you've put the right attachment on it, because that's something that happens. And template documents are also somewhere where we end up seeing quite a few breaches. So if you've got a document, a template that is blank that you send out to people, or that you fill in and then move somewhere else, make sure that if you're sending it out or you're filling it in, that you're not filling in the master copy, so that somebody else then takes a copy of it, sends it out thinking it's the blank one, and then finding out that it's got somebody's information in it. And we went through a spate of in the organization of overwriting templates. Thankfully, it never got to disclosing one, sending it out of the building. But the templates we were using internally, you'd open and go, somebody else has messed this up and saved the information into the document rather than saving it separately. So often some backpedaling and retrieving it, or taking information out of templates before you then use the documents. If you have a security breach, so if there is a breach of security that causes personal data to go to somebody that shouldn't have it, or for it to get lost, or for somebody to have gained access to it, then you need to look at the circumstances surrounding that. So when you identified that there's been a breach, have a think about what's happened, how serious that is, whether there's a risk to the individuals when their personal data, if their personal data was involved, so that you can think about the things you need to do to, at first, mitigate the risk that exists in that moment with that personal data. And it may be trying to recall emails, although that's obviously of limited success on occasions. And I don't know about you, but if somebody sends me an email asking to recall an email, I've never wanted to read it more. It might have been sitting in my inbox for a week, but if I get a recall message back, I really want to not do the appropriate thing and not look at it. It suddenly becomes the most interesting email in my inbox. So sometimes you need to think about methods of retrieving information when something goes wrong. You also need to think about whether you need to report the matter to us at the ODPA. So if you've had a data breach, if information has been compromised, within 72 hours of you finding out about the compromise, you need to have done a quick assessment to determine if there's going to be any risk to the individuals involved. And if there is, you need to report it to us on our website. And there's a link on our website that'll take you through step by step the sort of information that we would need from you when you're reporting a breach. Now, as I said before, we don't go all guns blazing when we get breaches. I think last year we had about 150 breaches in. That's a little bit hot off the press. Possibly don't tally that up against the annual report once we've done all our figures, because I might be slightly wrong. But we get over 100, between 100 and 200 breaches a year being reported to us. We're not opening massive investigations into all of those. And so we will assess anything that comes through, look at what the risks might be, look at what you're doing to mitigate those risks, and we will get back to you with words of advice. We might ask you further questions, and if it's very serious, if there's risk of significant harm, then we will look to open an inquiry to understand more about what's happened. But the vast majority of breaches that get reported to us, we handle in a more informal fashion, helping you to do what you need to do to put things right. So don't panic if you need to report something to us. And actually, it's more suspicious if we never get a breach from your organisation than it is if we get one or two, because let's be honest, we know there's stuff going on out there. We all know there's stuff going on out there. And if your organisation is not reporting anything, it becomes a concern as to whether they're picking up that something's gone wrong. Also, when thinking about breach reporting, you need to think about whether you need to tell the individual whose personal data has been exposed or compromised in the breach. And that's coming down to whether there's a high risk to the individual's significant interests. So is there a high risk of harm coming from the breach that's occurred? So you need to do an assessment and work out what that looks like. And it may be that what you've compromised is just an address, that an address has been compromised. But if you've got background information, if you are aware that that person has moved out of a recently allegedly abusive relationship and is now in that new address, then that puts the risk up should that address be compromised. So it's very difficult for us to say 3 addresses, don't worry, you don't need to tell an individual any more than that you need to. It's all about the other information that you hold around you. So if there's a high risk to individuals, you need to notify them, explain what's happened and what you're going to do about it. But that doesn't mean you don't want to tell people if it's not a high risk. And one slightly quirky way of building trust and confidence with your customers and clients is to own up when something's gone wrong. And we often see that in the reports that we get. If an organization has been open and honest and said, yeah, we messed up, this is what's happened, this is what we're going to do to fix it, individuals are incredibly understanding and say, yeah, okay, no, I appreciate you letting me know. I can see sometimes these things happen. Don't worry, not a big problem. So it doesn't necessarily compute that if you tell somebody, we will then get a complaint from that individual about what's happened. Often they'll just be pleased to know because then they know to protect themselves. So if you're wanting to look at building trust and confidence, you can tell people that there's been a breach when you don't have to. But as I say, if there's a high risk, you need to tell them. So that's sort of what you need to think around data security and handling breaches. What I would say is, even if you don't tell us about something that's happened, you should keep a record of the breach in case we come around to do an audit for any reason, or in case a question comes up and we want to ask you that question about something if somebody's found out that their personal data has been compromised. If you don't have a record of that to explain what you did, then we might be concerned about your methods of complying with the data protection law. So as I say, even if you don't report it to us because you feel you don't need to, keep records and try and learn from the mistakes that you've made. So if you've got the same mistake happening several times in your organization, is there a way you can stop that happening? So is it putting a delay on your email sending so that you've got time to go and do that quick check that you didn't hit the button too quickly, and you can go back and go, yep, no, that's the right Peter I meant to send it to, or you can stop it if you've picked the wrong person. So things like that. The last step is that we want to highlight at this time is to register with us at the ODPA. So if you are processing personal data, whether you're a controller or a processor or both, as an organization, as an entity, you need to be registered with us and to pay an annual levy. Now, our registration window is open from the 1st of January to the end of February every year. So we're in the middle. I was going to say middle, we're nearly 2/3 of the way through this year's registration window. So if you're processing personal data and you're not registered, pop onto our website. You can be guided through that process. The fees I've just got written down because we just put them up because of the RPI. So if you have fewer than 50 full-time employees, the registration fee is £62.22. But if you're a big organisation with more than with 50 or more FTEs, then the fee is £2,488.80. Charities and not-for-profit organisations, if you've got any on the line, that's free to register. So pop onto our website or give us a call and we can talk you through that process. And that helps to show that you've recognised that there is a need to deal with data protection, that it's important. We then know that you recognise that. We've then got contact details if we need to speak to you. So if something does come up and you're on our register, that puts you on a much better footing than if we have to try and hunt you down if you've not been registered with us. But we're nice and kind and adorable, so we don't really do much hunting down, I promise. On the subject of where to get help, things that we can do to help you, give us a call anytime. Our phone number's there. We're more than willing to talk to you. We've got a team of investigators that handle all our complaints and breaches, and they're very skilled at providing advice and guidance and helping. So whether it's before something happens or after something's happened, feel free to give us a call. We run drop-ins at the moment in the registration window. We do a drop-in every Tuesday morning. So between 9 and 12, you can pop into our office in Lefebvre Court and speak with one of our officers. You get about half an hour. If it's full and we've got lots of people, it will be just half an hour and then we'll move on to the next. But if you're the only one that pops in that morning, you might get 2 hours of an officer's time to talk through things. And that's because sometimes with data protection, it's easier to be able to bring in a bit of paper and to sort of sit and look at the same thing and work things out rather than trying to do it over the phone. Obviously, when we run events, feel free to come to the events, and there'll be more listed on our events page. And again, thank you to Chamber for hosting this event today. And there's our email address, so our information address. If you've got any questions or queries, then email those through and someone will get back to you. And that then leaves me with questions. So do we have any questions? And at this point, I need to try and find my Teams again. There you go.
Rachel, that was brilliant. Thank you ever so much. There's loads that I've taken away from that. I've been writing down as we've been going along. And I will echo the when you said about protecting your reputation and being open and honest and transparent, that I think that really does ring true. You know, being open with your clients about when you've made a mistake, it definitely does build the trust for sure. There's a question from Susie Crowder in the chat. When is your next training event, please?
There you go. There's a question. I'm just going to check our website. I'm not sure if we've got anything timetabled in, but we will be doing some later this year. So yeah, we don't have it timetabled in yet.
We'll include it in the post-event email if you want.
Yeah, we'll give you a copy. We'll put a copy in there, a link in the email. We'll send it to Chamber so it can be sent out. Also, you can get popped on our newsletter, and then you can get an update every 2 months about what we've been doing, what's coming up, and things that are happening in the data protection world. So that's another way to make sure that you can you know when we're up to things. But keep an eye out on our website.
And Susie, a question from me is, what sort of training would you be after for the ODPA to put on? If you can pop that in the chat, that would also be really helpful. If there's anything specific you're looking for, it might be that we can collaborate again, Rachel, and put another session on.
Well, yes, that's it. So we run set sessions. We've got a breach workshop we do. That takes you into a bit more detail through what breach reporting looks like, how to protect the data, how to think about risk, that sort of thing. So we do at least one of those a year. We do a data subject access request session every year as well. And we do sessions specifically for charities, but that's what we've got that happens every year. That doesn't mean that we wouldn't do anything else. If there's a need from Chamber members, then we can collaborate again and we'll see what we can do. Because we might be running sessions you don't want. So it'd be useful to know what sessions you do want.
I'm sure all the sessions are very useful and are what people want, Rachel, but I'm sure there's always a request for more. It's a tricky old subject to keep on top of, that's for sure.
Yes. And if you are, not that I want to do away with how important Chamber is, but if you're also a member of another professional organisation that's more specific to, I don't know, some compliance organisation, then by all means, we can come and speak to that your members as well about various things. So we just want to get out there and make sure that we get an opportunity to help you all get it right, because it saves us work if you do it right first off. Otherwise, we've got investigations to do, and they're much more problematic than just helping you at the start. So.
Prevention's better than cure, isn't it?
Indeed, that's it. Yeah. And of course, if you're an individual, you want to know, not that somebody knows how to fix it when it goes wrong. You just don't want it to go wrong. So it's useful if we can get in first off.
Well, in that case, then I am going to draw this to a close because I haven't got any other questions in the chat. I will just reiterate, everyone, we have recorded this, so I will be sharing it with you. You will get a copy of the slides, and we'll include some information on the training events that the ODPA have got planned. If you do want us to do any different topics, please let us know. And if you have any questions that come up afterwards, the contact details for Rachel and her team will be on the email.
Yep, I'll just pop them up there as again now, just for you to note down if you want to. But thank you very much, Alice,
No, thank you.
your colleagues for running this session. It's been good fun. I'm assuming there's still some people out there, which is always a
There is
slightly weird
indeed.
thing with
There is
being
indeed.
online, but unless lots of fire alarms have gone off. But yes, thank you very much for the opportunity, and I look forward to doing something similar again in the future.
Thank you, everyone.